The massive space station floating in the void between star systems held representatives from 17 different species, all gathered for what would become known as the most important mathematical event in galactic history. Dr. Quinter, the lead Valkorian mathematician, stood before the assembled crowd of aliens, his 6 arms gesturing gracefully as he spoke through the universal translator. For 30 standard years, the greatest minds from across our galaxy have worked together to create something unprecedented, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The cognitive fracture examination represents the pinnacle of mathematical complexity. It is designed to identify the most advanced mathematical intellects in known space. The gathered aliens murmured among themselves, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and telepathic hums. The crystalline beings from Sector 7 resonated with harmonic frequencies that spoke of excitement. The gas-form entities from the nebula clusters pulsed with colors that indicated deep interest. Even the machine intelligences from the core worlds transmitted approval signals through their quantum. NETWORKS. Dr. Quinter continued his presentation, his pale blue skin shifting to a deeper shade that indicated pride. This examination consists of multidimensional probability matrices that exist in 11-dimensional space. The quantum logic paradoxes alone require understanding of mathematical principles that most species have yet to discover. The recursive mathematical structures involved can break minds that are not prepared for such complexity. A member of the hive species, speaking through their collective consciousness, asked a question that hung in the air like a challenge. What is the expected success rate for this examination? Our most conservative estimates suggest that perhaps 1 being in 10 million across the galaxy might be capable of solving even the preliminary sections, Dr. Quinter replied. The complete examination would require a mathematical genius of unprecedented capability. The reason for creating such an impossibly difficult test was simple yet urgent. A massive star system in the outer rim was showing signs of gravitational collapse that could affect trade routes used by billions of beings. The dimensional calculations needed to predict and possibly prevent this catastrophe required mathematical skills beyond what any single species had achieved. The cognitive fracture examination was designed to find individuals capable of such work. Species after species volunteered their finest mathematicians. The Valkorians, who considered themselves the mathematical masters of the galaxy, put forward their most brilliant minds. The crystalline beings, whose entire physiology was based on mathematical principles, selected individuals who could process numerical concepts at quantum speeds. The gas-form entities chose representatives, who existed partially in higher dimensions and could visualize mathematical concepts that solid matter beings could barely comprehend. Then came an unexpected request. The Terran Federation wishes to submit a candidate, announced Ambassador Wilson, a human diplomat who had been quietly observing the proceedings. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Several alien species made sounds that the translator interpreted as laughter. Dr. Quinter's skin shifted to a shade that indicated polite confusion mixed with barely concealed amusement. Ambassador Wilson, Dr. Quinter said carefully, "We appreciate the Terran Federation's interest in this project. However, this examination is designed for the most advanced mathematical minds in the galaxy. Humans have achieved interstellar travel only recently, and your species' mathematical capabilities are still quite primitive by galactic standards." "We understand the challenge," Ambassador Wilson replied calmly, "but we would like the opportunity to participate nonetheless." A crystalline being resonated with frequencies that translated to barely polite skepticism. "The humans cannot even visualize 4-dimensional space reliably. How do they expect to comprehend 11-dimensional mathematical structures?" "Perhaps," suggested a gas-form entity, its colors shifting to patterns that indicated gentle condescension, "the humans could observe the examination process. It might be educational for their species' mathematical development." Ambassador Wilson remained calm despite the obvious dismissal. "We are not asking for special consideration. We simply want to participate under the same conditions as every other species." The debate continued for several hours. Some species argued that allowing humans to participate would be a waste of time and resources. Others suggested that it might be useful to establish a baseline for less advanced species. The machine intelligences calculated that human participation would have zero probability of success, but minimal impact on the overall examination process. Finally, Dr. Quinter made the decision that would change everything. Very well. The Terran Federation may submit one candidate. However, we must be clear about expectations. This examination has been designed by the greatest mathematical minds from 17 different species over 3 decades. The problems involve concepts that most species require teams of specialists to even understand. A single human attempting this examination alone is unprecedented its futility. We understand, Ambassador Wilson said. We'll have our candidate ready within the standard preparation period. As the meeting concluded and the various species began making arrangements for their candidates, Dr. Quinter felt a mixture of curiosity and pity for whatever human would attempt the impossible. The Valkorian mathematician had spent his entire career studying the mathematical capabilities of different species, and humans ranked among the lowest in terms of raw computational ability, spatial reasoning, and abstract mathematical thinking. The examination would take place aboard the massive Valkorian science vessel, Theorem's Edge, a ship designed specifically for advanced mathematical research. The testing chamber could create holographic representations of mathematical concepts that existed beyond normal three-dimensional space. The problems would be presented as interactive constructs that responded to thought patterns, allowing candidates to manipulate mathematical objects that had no physical existence. Each candidate would face the same sequence of challenges. First, they would need to solve multidimensional probability matrices that described the behavior of quantum particles across 11 dimensions. Then they would tackle quantum logic paradoxes that required understanding mathematical principles that defied common logic. Finally, they would encounter recursive mathematical structures that folded back on themselves in ways that could trap unprepared minds in infinite loops of calculation. The greatest mathematical minds in the galaxy would be pushed to their absolute limits. Some might not survive the experience mentally intact. The examination had been specifically designed to find individuals capable of mathematical thinking that transcended normal limitations, and into this crucible of mathematical complexity, humanity was about to send a single representative. Dr. Quinter almost felt sorry for whoever that human would be, almost. Dr. Maria Santos stared at the official message on her computer screen for the 3rd time, still unable to believe what she was reading. The Terran Federation was asking her to represent humanity in the most important mathematical examination in galactic history. Her, a software engineer who spent her weekends solving crossword puzzles and Sudoku variants. "This has to be a mistake," she muttered, reaching for her phone to call the Federation's academic liaison office. "Dr. Santos," the voice on the other end confirmed, "there's no mistake. You're our selected candidate for the cognitive fracture examination." "But I'm not even Earth's most accomplished mathematician," Maria protested. "There are hundreds of people more qualified than me. Nobel laureates, Fields Medal winners, professors at the top universities. All unavailable," the liaison officer explained with barely concealed frustration. "The notification period was extremely short. Dr. Peterson is recovering from surgery. Dr. Chang is in the middle of a research project she can't abandon. Dr. Rodriguez has a family emergency. You were the only qualified candidate available when the deadline was announced." Maria felt a knot forming in her stomach. "Qualified? I work for a software company. I design user interfaces. My PhD is in applied mathematics, not theoretical. Physics or whatever they're expecting. Your academic record shows advanced degrees in mathematics and computer science. Plus, you've published papers on pattern recognition and logical reasoning systems. That makes you more qualified than 99% of the human population." Now, that's not saying much when we're competing against species that can visualize 11-dimensional space, Maria said weakly. Look, Dr. Santos, we understand this isn't ideal, but humanity requested a spot at this examination and we need to send someone. The diplomatic implications of backing out now would be significant. You're smart, you're capable, and you're available. That's what we have to work with. 3 days later, Maria found herself aboard a transport ship heading toward the Valkorian science vessel, Theorem's Edge. The ship was unlike anything she had ever seen, a massive structure that seemed to bend space around itself. Mathematical equations flowed across its hull like living things, shifting and changing as she watched. The docking bay was filled with beings that looked like they had stepped out of science fiction movies. Crystalline creatures that sparkled with internal light, gas-form entities that maintained barely solid shapes, and dozens of other species she couldn't even begin to categorize. All of them radiated an aura of intellectual superiority that made Maria feel like a child who had wandered into a university. Lecture. Dr. Quinter greeted her with what she assumed was politeness, though his 6 arms moved in patterns that suggested barely concealed amusement. Dr. Santos, welcome aboard the Theorem's Edge. I trust your journey was comfortable? Yes, thank you, Maria replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I have to admit, I'm not sure what to expect from this examination. Of course not, Doctor, Quinter said, his skin shifting to a shade that indicated gentle condescension. The cognitive fracture examination involves mathematical concepts that most species require extensive preparation to even comprehend. Perhaps it would be helpful for you to observe the other candidates as they prepare. He led her through corridors lined with holographic displays showing mathematical equations that hurt to look at directly. The complexity was overwhelming, symbols, and structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than her mind could process. These are preliminary warm-up exercises, Dr. Quinter explained casually. Most candidates spend several days just familiarizing themselves with the basic concepts before attempting the actual examination. They entered a large chamber where the other candidates were working. The crystalline, being designated as resonance of prime factors, was creating 3-dimensional light structures that shifted between different mathematical states. The gas-form entity known as probability cloud was manipulating what looked like floating geometric shapes that existed partially outside normal space. The most intimidating candidate was the representative from the hive species, a collective consciousness that could process multiple mathematical concepts simultaneously. Maria watched as dozens of holographic displays showed different aspects of a single complex problem being solved in parallel. Each of these candidates represents the pinnacle of their species' mathematical achievement, Dr. Quinter said. Resonance of prime factors can process numerical concepts at quantum speeds. Probability cloud exists partially in higher dimensions and can visualize mathematical structures that solid matter beings cannot comprehend. The hive collective can approach problems from multiple angles simultaneously. Maria nodded, feeling increasingly out of place. And what exactly will the examination involve? Multidimensional probability matrices that describe quantum behavior across 11 dimensions. Quantum logic paradoxes that require understanding mathematical principles beyond conventional logic. Recursive mathematical structures that can trap unprepared minds in infinite calculation loops. That sounds incredibly complex, Maria said. It is designed to be, Dr. Quinter replied. The problems we face require mathematical thinking that transcends normal limitations. The star system collapse we're trying to prevent involves gravitational interactions that exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The calculations required are beyond what any single species has achieved. As they walked, Maria noticed something that seemed odd. The other candidates were all working alone, each focused intensely on their individual preparation. There was no collaboration, no sharing of ideas, no discussion of different approaches. Each species seemed to believe that their particular form of mathematical thinking was superior to all others. Dr. Santos, Dr. Quinter said, I should mention that the examination will be administered in a specialized chamber where mathematical problems are presented as holographic constructs that respond to thought patterns. You'll be able to manipulate the mathematical objects directly, though I suspect you'll find the interface challenging. I appreciate the warning, Maria said. I should also mention that several medical teams will be standing by during the examination. The mental strain of attempting problems beyond one's capabilities can be quite dangerous. We've had candidates suffer permanent psychological damage from exposure to mathematical concepts their minds couldn't process. Maria felt her throat go dry. Has anyone ever died from taking a mathematics test? Not died, exactly, Dr. Quinter said carefully. But some minds have become trapped in infinite calculation loops and required extensive rehabilitation to return to normal function. As they returned to her quarters, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something far more dangerous than a simple examination. The other candidates weren't just highly skilled mathematicians, they were beings whose entire existence was built around mathematical thinking. She was a human who solved puzzles for fun. About to compete against the mathematical elite of the galaxy, that night, unable to sleep, Maria pulled out her tablet and opened her collection of puzzle books. Crosswords, Sudoku variants, logic puzzles, number games. It was her way of relaxing, of keeping her mind sharp. As she worked through a particularly challenging puzzle, she wondered if this would be the last time she'd be able to enjoy something so simple and peaceful. The examination chamber was a perfect sphere lined with surfaces that could display holographic constructs in three-dimensional space. As Maria stepped inside, she felt a tingling sensation as the room's sensors began reading her brain patterns. The other candidates were already in position, each surrounded by their own array of mathematical displays. Dr. Quinter's voice came through the chamber's communication system. Candidates, you may begin. The first section involves multidimensional probability matrices. You have unlimited time, but be aware that prolonged exposure to these concepts can be mentally taxing. Immediately, the chamber filled with holographic structures that seemed to exist in impossible spaces. The other candidates began working with practiced efficiency. Resonance of prime factors created resonating light patterns that shifted between different mathematical states. Probability cloud began manipulating floating geometric shapes that phased in and out of normal space. The Hive Collective activated multiple displays simultaneously, their collective consciousness processing different aspects of the same problem. Maria stared at the holographic construct that appeared before her. It was a three-dimensional representation of an 11-dimensional mathematical structure, something that should have been impossible to visualize. The complexity was staggering, with interconnected elements that seemed to fold back on themselves in ways that made her head spin, but as she looked at it, something unexpected happened. Instead of seeing an incomprehensible mathematical nightmare, she began to notice patterns. The way certain elements connected reminded her of the constraint relationships in a Sudoku puzzle. The interconnected loops looked like the logic chains she used to solve crossword puzzles. The probability relationships were similar to the deductive reasoning she used in logic puzzles. This is weird, she muttered. Reaching out to touch one of the holographic elements, the construct responded to her touch, shifting and changing in response to her mental focus. Where the other candidates were performing complex mathematical operations, Maria found herself thinking about the problem the way she approached recreational puzzles. She looked for constraints, for relationships that limited the possible solutions, for logical shortcuts that could eliminate impossible options. The 11-dimensional structure began to make sense when she stopped trying to understand it as a mathematical object and started treating it as a complex puzzle box. Each dimension was like a different type of constraint, similar to how crossword puzzles have both horizontal and vertical word constraints, or how Sudoku puzzles have row, column, and box constraints. Interesting, she said, beginning to manipulate a construct. If this relationship is true, then these elements can't be in this configuration. She began applying elimination techniques, the same logical processes she used when solving puzzles. Instead of calculating complex equations, she was identifying impossibilities and working backward from constraints. The mathematical structure began to simplify as she eliminated options that couldn't work from the observation area. Dr. Quinter watched in confusion. "What is the human doing?" he asked his assistant. "She's not following any recognized mathematical methodology," the assistant replied. "She's not performing the expected calculations or attempting to derive the theoretical framework. She's just manipulating the construct directly." "But she's making progress," Dr. Quinter observed. "Look at how the structure is simplifying under her manipulations." Meanwhile, the other candidates were struggling with the fundamental complexity of the problems. Resonance of prime factors was creating increasingly complex resonance patterns, trying to find mathematical harmonics that would reveal the underlying structure. Probability cloud was phasing through multiple dimensional states, attempting to visualize the 11-dimensional relationships directly. The Hive Collective was running parallel calculations on dozens of different approaches. Maria, however, was treating the problem like a particularly challenging variety of Sudoku. She had identified the constraint relationships and was systematically eliminating possibilities. Where others saw mathematical complexity, she saw logical puzzle mechanics that had been scaled up to ridiculous proportions. "This section here," she said, pointing to a cluster of interconnected elements, "is just like a logic grid puzzle. These relationships define what combinations are possible, and once you figure out one element, it constrains all the others." She continued working through the problem, applying pattern recognition skills that came from years of recreational puzzle solving. The multidimensional probability matrix wasn't fundamentally different from the complex logic puzzles she solved for fun. It was just presented in a more intimidating format. As she worked, Maria began to notice something else. The mathematical structures weren't just complex for complexity's sake. They were elegant, with underlying patterns that were actually quite beautiful once you understood how to look at them. The 11-dimensional relationships followed logical rules that were similar to the constraint systems in her favorite puzzles. "Oh, this is clever," she said, manipulating another section of the construct. "It's like a 3-dimensional crossword where the words exist in different dimensional planes. Once you understand the constraint relationships, you can solve it, using the same logical processes." From the observation area, Dr. Quinter was becoming increasingly agitated. "This is impossible. She's solving problems that should require extensive theoretical preparation and complex mathematical calculations. How is she doing this?" "Perhaps," his assistant suggested, "humans process mathematical information differently than we expected. But they're supposed to be one of the less mathematically capable species," Dr. Quinter said. "Their brains are designed for survival in primitive environments, not advanced mathematical reasoning." On the chamber floor, Maria had moved on to the second section of the examination. The quantum logic paradoxes were presented as holographic constructs that seemed to contradict themselves. Where the other candidates were attempting to resolve the paradoxes through advanced theoretical frameworks, Maria was approaching them like logic puzzles that had trick solutions. "This is just like those paradox puzzles in the logic books," she said, examining the holographic construct. "The paradox exists because you're making assumptions that aren't actually required by the problem statement. If you approach it from a different angle, the contradiction disappears." She began manipulating the construct, not trying to resolve the paradox mathematically, but looking for the logical loophole that would reveal the trick. Within minutes, she had found the key insight that dissolved the apparent contradiction. The other candidates were still working on the first section, their advanced mathematical minds struggling with the sheer complexity of the problems. The Hive Collective was showing signs of internal conflict as different subminds proposed contradictory solutions. Resonance of prime factors was beginning to overheat from the computational strain. Probability cloud was having difficulty maintaining coherent form while processing the multidimensional relationships. Maria, meanwhile, was enjoying herself. These weren't impossibly complex mathematical challenges, they were just really elaborate puzzles, and she loved puzzles. The more complex and tricky they were, the more satisfying it was to find the elegant solution hidden beneath the apparent complexity. "Dr. Santos," Dr. Quinter's voice came through the communication system. "Are you experiencing any mental strain or discomfort?" Not really, Maria replied, working on the third section of the examination. These are challenging. But they're not fundamentally different from the logic puzzles I solve for fun. Once you understand the underlying pattern, the solution becomes pretty obvious. Dr. Quinter exchanged glances with his assistant. Something was happening that they hadn't anticipated, something that challenged everything they thought they knew about mathematical ability and human intelligence. Hours passed in the examination chamber, and the difference between Maria's approach and that of the other candidates became increasingly dramatic. While the galactic mathematical elite struggled with theoretical frameworks and complex calculations, Maria worked through problem after problem with the methodical satisfaction of someone solving her daily crossword puzzle. The third section of the examination presented recursive mathematical structures that were designed to trap unprepared minds in infinite loops of calculation. The holographic constructs appeared as geometric forms that seemed to fall back on themselves, creating mathematical relationships that referenced their own solutions in ways that could spiral into endless complexity. Resonance of prime factors had been working on a single recursive structure for over an hour, its crystalline form flickering with increasingly unstable energy patterns. The mathematical processing centers within its body were generating heat that threatened to crack its crystal matrix. Dr. Quinter watched nervously as the temperature readings climbed toward dangerous levels. "Candidate resonance of prime factors," he announced through the communication system. "Your core temperature is approaching critical levels. You may want to take a break." The crystalline being's response came as a series of harmonic frequencies that translated to stubborn determination. It would not admit defeat, even if the mathematical challenge was pushing it beyond safe. Operational parameters, probability cloud was experiencing similar difficulties. The gas form entity was attempting to visualize the recursive structures by existing partially in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The effort was causing it to lose coherence, its form becoming increasingly unstable as it struggled to maintain consciousness across multiple dimensional planes. "Warning," the monitoring systems announced. "Candidate probability cloud is showing signs of dimensional dispersal. Medical intervention may be required." The Hive Collective was perhaps in the worst situation. The recursive mathematical structures were causing feedback loops within their shared consciousness. Different subminds were arriving at contradictory solutions, creating internal conflicts that threatened to tear apart their collective identity. The medical team was already preparing neural stabilizers in case the collective consciousness began to fragment. Maria, meanwhile, was humming softly to herself as she worked through the recursive structures. She had recognized them immediately as a type of logic puzzle she knew well, though admittedly scaled up to ridiculous proportions. "These are just like those loop puzzles in the advanced logic books," she said, manipulating the holographic construct with casual confidence. "The trick is not to get caught up in the recursion. You have to identify the base case and work backward from there." She had approached the recursive structures the same way she approached any puzzle with self-referential elements. Instead of trying to solve them directly, she looked for the logical anchor points that would break the recursion. Once she found those, the rest of the structure collapsed into a manageable solution. "The recursion is just a red herring," she continued, talking to herself as she often did when solving complex puzzles. "The real solution is hidden in the constraint relationships. Once you see that, the recursive elements actually make the puzzle easier, not harder." From the observation area, Dr. Quinter was frantically running diagnostic checks on the examination system. "This cannot be correct," he muttered. "The human is solving problems faster than our theoretical models predicted was possible." Perhaps, his assistant suggested carefully, "our models were incorrect." "These problems were designed by the greatest mathematical minds from 17 different species over 30 years, Dr. Quinter said. "They incorporate concepts that most species haven't even discovered yet. A single human cannot possibly be solving them like simple puzzles, but the evidence was undeniable." Maria had completed the first 3 sections of the examination, while the other candidates were still struggling with the initial problems. Her solutions weren't just correct, they were elegant. using mathematical shortcuts that none of the test designers had considered. Dr. Santos, Dr. Quinter's voice came through the communication system. Could you please explain your methodology? We're having difficulty understanding how you're approaching these problems. Maria looked up from the holographic construct she was manipulating. Oh, sure, I'm just treating them like logic puzzles. This one here is basically a three-dimensional version of a puzzle type called a constraint satisfaction problem. You have a set of variables that have to satisfy multiple constraints simultaneously, and you solve it by systematically eliminating possibilities that violate the constraints. But these are 11-dimensional mathematical structures involving quantum probability relationships. Dr. Quinter protested. Right, but the underlying logic is the same, Maria replied. It doesn't matter how many dimensions you're working with or how complex the relationships are. If you can identify the constraint patterns, you can solve the puzzle using basic logical elimination techniques. She gestured to another holographic construct. This recursive structure here is just like a puzzle called a strange loop. The recursion looks complicated, but if you identify the base case and work backward, you can solve it without getting caught in the infinite regression. Strange loop? Dr. Quinter asked. Is that a recognized mathematical concept in human mathematics? Not really, Maria said. It's more of a puzzle category. Humans create these things for entertainment. We have books full of logic puzzles that use similar principles, just not usually presented as 11-dimensional holographic constructs. The implications of this statement hit Dr. Quinter like a physical blow. You mean humans create these types of logical challenges for entertainment? Oh yes, Maria said cheerfully. Logic puzzles are really popular on Earth. Crosswords, Sudoku, constraint satisfaction puzzles, recursive logic problems. There are magazines dedicated to them, online communities, competitions. Millions of people solve these kinds of puzzles every day just for fun. In the observation area, Dr. Quinter sat down heavily in his chair. The greatest mathematical challenge ever devised by galactic civilization was being solved by a human who was treating it like a recreational activity. The problems that were supposed to identify the most advanced mathematical minds in the galaxy were apparently similar to puzzles that humans solved for entertainment. Sir, his assistant said quietly, should we inform the other candidates that the human has completed the examination? Dr. Quinter looked at the monitoring displays. Resonance of prime factors was still overheating from computational strain. Probability cloud was barely maintaining coherent form. The Hive Collective was showing signs of internal fragmentation. All of them were struggling with problems that Maria had solved while humming to herself. No, he said finally. Let them continue. I need to understand what's happening here. He activated the direct communication channel to Maria. Dr. Santos, you've completed the examination, but would you be willing to continue working on some additional problems? We'd like to better understand your approach. Sure, Maria said. Do you have any harder ones? These were fun, but they weren't really that challenging once you figured out the pattern. Dr. Quinter felt something that might have been either admiration or terror the human had just described. The most complex mathematical examination in galactic history as not really that challenging. And she wanted harder problems. Dr. Santos, he said carefully, could you help us understand something? How many humans would be capable of solving problems like these? Maria considered the question. Well, these particular problems would probably be challenging for most people because of the presentation format. But the underlying logic? Any dedicated puzzle solver could handle it. There are probably millions of humans who could solve these if they were presented in a more familiar format. The observation area fell silent. Dr. Quinter stared at the displays, trying to process what he was hearing. The galaxy's most advanced mathematical minds were being surpassed by a species that treated complex logical reasoning as a form of entertainment. And there were millions of them. The aftermath of the examination created chaos throughout the galactic academic community. Dr. Quinter found himself in the unprecedented position of having to explain how a human had not only completed the cognitive fracture examination but had done so in less than 6 hours while treating it as a recreational activity. The other candidates required extensive medical attention. Resonance of prime factors needed 3 days of cooling treatments to prevent permanent damage to its crystalline matrix. Probability cloud required dimensional stabilization therapy to maintain coherent form. The Hive Collective had to undergo consciousness reconstruction to repair the internal conflicts caused by the recursive mathematical structures. Maria, meanwhile, was asking if there were any puzzle books in the ship's library. Dr. Santos, Dr. Quinter said, sitting across from her in the ship's conference room, I need to understand what happened in that examination chamber. According to our analysis, you solved problems that should have been impossible for your species to even comprehend. I don't think they were impossible, Maria replied. They were just presented in an unfamiliar format. Once I realized they were basically logic puzzles, everything clicked into place. But these weren't logic puzzles, Dr. Quinter protested. These were advanced mathematical concepts involving multidimensional relationships and quantum probability matrices. Right, but the underlying logical structure was the same, Maria explained. It doesn't matter if you're working with numbers or quantum states or 11-dimensional objects. If you have a set of constraints and you need to find solutions that satisfy all of them simultaneously, you use logical elimination techniques. Dr. Quinter activated a holographic display showing one of the examination problems. This recursive mathematical structure was designed to require advanced theoretical understanding of mathematical infinity and self-referential systems. How did you approach it? Oh, that one was easy, Maria said. It's just like a puzzle called a strange loop. You see this pattern here? It's trying to reference its own solution, which creates the illusion of infinite complexity. But if you identify the base case and work backward, you can solve it without getting trapped in the recursion. Strange loop? Dr. Quinter repeated. Where did you learn about strange loops? From a puzzle book, Maria said. There's a whole category of recursive logic puzzles that use similar principles. They're pretty popular among puzzle enthusiasts. The implications were staggering. Dr. Quinter had spent decades studying the mathematical capabilities of different species, and he was beginning to realize that the galactic academic community had fundamentally misunderstood human intelligence. Dr. Santos, he said carefully, how many humans would be familiar with these types of logical reasoning techniques? Maria considered the question. Well, puzzle solving is a pretty common hobby on Earth. There are millions of people who regularly solve crosswords, Sudoku, logic puzzles, constraint satisfaction problems. Most of them probably don't realize they're using advanced logical reasoning techniques. They just think of it as entertainment. Entertainment? Dr. Quinter repeated weakly. Yes, it's fun, Maria said. There's something satisfying about taking a complex problem and finding the elegant solution hidden inside it. The more complicated the puzzle looks, the more rewarding it is when you figure out the trick. Dr. Quinter requested an emergency meeting with the Galactic Academic Council. Representatives from all 17 species gathered virtually to hear his report, and the reaction was immediate and dramatic. This is impossible, declared the representative from the Crystalline Collective. Humans are a primitive species with limited mathematical capability. They cannot possibly have solved the cognitive fracture examination. I've verified the results multiple times, Dr. Quinter replied. Not only did Dr. Santos complete the examination, but her solutions demonstrate mathematical insights that none of our test designers had considered. The representative from the hive species asked the question that everyone was thinking. What does this mean for our understanding of intelligence and mathematical capability? Dr. Quinter had spent days analyzing Maria's solutions and studying human recreational puzzle culture. His findings challenged everything the galactic community thought they knew about cognitive development and mathematical thinking. It appears, he said, that humans have developed something unique in the galaxy. While other species treat mathematical reasoning as a pure intellectual pursuit, humans have turned logical problem-solving into a form of entertainment. This has created a culture where millions of individuals regularly exercise their logical reasoning abilities for fun. But surely, the Valkorian representative protested, advanced mathematical concepts require specialized training and theoretical understanding. Recreational puzzles cannot be equivalent to serious mathematical work. That's what we believed, Dr. Quinter said, but it appears we were wrong. The cognitive fracture examination wasn't actually testing mathematical knowledge, in the traditional sense. It was testing logical reasoning ability, pattern recognition, and constraint satisfaction skills. These are exactly the abilities that humans develop through recreational puzzle solving. The revelation reshaped the entire galactic approach to mathematical education and research. Emergency research teams were dispatched to Earth to study human puzzle culture. Within months, logic puzzle books were being translated into 17 different alien languages and distributed throughout the galaxy. The star system collapse that had prompted the creation of the cognitive fracture examination was successfully predicted and prevented using dimensional calculations that Maria developed. Her approach, treating the complex gravitational interactions as a massive constraint satisfaction problem, provided solutions that were both elegant and computationally efficient, but perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed intelligence itself. The assumption that mathematical ability was the pinnacle of intellectual achievement was replaced by a broader understanding of cognitive diversity. Each species brought unique strengths to problem solving, and humans had contributed something that no one else had developed: the ability to make complex logical reasoning enjoyable. 6 months later, Dr. Quinter found himself in an Earth classroom, learning how to solve a crossword puzzle. The Valkorian mathematician who had once dismissed humans as mathematically primitive was now struggling with a puzzle that millions of humans solved daily over breakfast. The key, Maria explained patiently, is to look for the constraint relationships between the clues. Each word you solve gives you letters that constrain the possible solutions for the crossing words. This is remarkably similar to the multidimensional constraint problems we studied in advanced mathematics, Dr. Quinter observed. Exactly, Maria said. The principles are the same, just applied to words instead of numbers. Once you understand constraint satisfaction, you can apply it to almost any type of problem. Around the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. Crystalline beings were learning to solve Sudoku puzzles that helped them develop new approaches to numerical analysis. Gas-form entities were working on three-dimensional logic puzzles that enhanced their spatial reasoning abilities. Hive collectives were discovering that collaborative puzzle solving improved their internal communication and reduced cognitive conflicts, the mathematical challenge that was designed to identify the galaxy's most advanced minds had revealed something. Far more important, intelligence wasn't about having the most powerful computational abilities or the most advanced theoretical knowledge. It was about having the right cognitive tools for the problem at hand. And sometimes those tools came from the most unexpected places. Like a software engineer who solved puzzles for fun and approached the most complex mathematical examination in galactic history as if it were a particularly interesting crossword puzzle, the galaxy had learned that when it came to solving impossible problems, sometimes the best approach was to treat them like games. And no species in the galaxy was better at turning serious challenges into enjoyable games than humans. It was, as Maria had said, just more fun that way.